Welcome to the Rant Live. Hey everybody, welcome to the Rant. Today is Wednesday, November 2nd, a very important date in Cubs history. Happens to be the day that the Cubs started the game that would end in a World Series championship on November 3rd. But I think we just celebrate November 2nd as being the day that they won.
You know,
it was like after midnight.
Yeah, I guess it depends, where you were at the time.
True.
It may have time zones, but yeah, it was definitely a late one. Hard to forget, but it also feels like we're at times, I think, getting. It's certainly not dangerously close to 85 Bears territory because, in that case, we're talking almost 40 years. But there is kind of this like, man, this team has sucked for a while. Hey, 6 years ago.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's there's a little bit of that.
Think that. Yeah. I often think that. And Mick Gillespie actually tweeted that. Like, I think it, but I don't tweet it. He actually tweeted it. I don't know if you saw his tweet where he was basically.
I did not see that one.
Over this. Yeah, he was just, and I'm sick of it. I am. I love. It's cool to go back, but what I hate is how, like, it's this thing that like gets like celebrated so much all the time.
Right.
And I get it. We won the World Series 6 years ago, and so there shouldn't be. And it's hard. I don't want to tell anybody how to fan, so I'm certainly not trying to do that. But I just think it's a little kind of rough when you're constantly celebrating the same thing, which was a World Series championship from 6 years ago. It does get kind of 85 Bearsy.
Yeah. And again, there's, I guess it'd be weirder almost if they got close, if they're actually kind of good, because part of it comes back to like, man, remember how awesome that was? Because these past couple of years have sucked. And so it's fun to remember. And part of it, it's like, hey, and I like intentionally avoided that. I was kind of thinking about some of that myself and sharing some, but then I was like, there's enough of it. Like at a certain point, I just didn't want to, add to the discourse anymore. I shared, I think some when I had some pictures, like when I was walking into game one. And the whole thing still has a quality of like surreality all the way around. And it still feels weird. And I mean, at least if we're the Cubs fans, we can celebrate that we got to have that World Series title, and it was only 6 years ago versus the Dodgers' last real title being in 89 or whatever, right? So they got that Mickey Mouse title from a couple years ago when it wasn't a real season and the playoffs weren't real, and they played in neutral sites and things like that. So at least the Cubs fans don't have to be Dodgers fans, and we've all got that going for us. But there is kind of this, as we're celebrating that, we're watching Kyle Schwarber launch moonshots, and Bryce Harper, who should have been a Cub, right? We've told and who's just absolutely mashing on the highest level now, and just and Nick Castellanos to a lesser extent, but still, it's like,
what he's not a great fielder, but he sure is now.
Yeah, like all of a sudden, where the hell did this come from? Like Nick Castellanos is making these diving plays. Like, balls. Where the hell did this come from? I remember when there were plays that he'd make that, and you'd be like, ooh, hey, he got it. Which I'm sure
point,
people still are.
It just feels like Schwarber is taunting Jed Hoyer. I mean, it's like he is a World Series hero. I mean, he was a World Series hero for the Cubs. He got the single that led to the game winning. I don't know. You call it a game-winning run, but technically Miguel Montero
set up the play that single-handedly made people think Albert Almora Jr. was a really good baseball player.
When he tagged up, first,
he's very. Let me back that up. I want to say this correct because I don't want to be just overly rude. Like he's an elite level baseball player. He's just not a leadoff hitting everyday all-star type player that everybody in Chicago for some reason thought. It's only because Joe Madden doesn't give this guy enough chances. And I'm like, you need to go back and look at all the chances this dude got, because he hit in the leadoff spot more than he hit in any other spot in the batting order during his time in Chicago. He was grossly misused, but I digress. But still, that tag up play like forever cemented him in people's minds as like, oh, he's the next coming of the, center field. He's going to take over for Dexter Fowler. And I believe that for a minute, but people still do. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
He had, in his defense though, it all goes back to when he hit that foul ball that
Oh
hit
yeah.
that little kid.
I'm fully convinced that did actually
totally
derail his career.
Derailed him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So who knows what he would have been if that wouldn't have happened mentally. It's just hard to get past something like that. So I get it. But so today is the anniversary, and so everyone is celebrating accordingly. But to the point that I wanted to get to was I want to be celebrating a new title. I don't want to be celebrating the same old thing over and over and over again. And I think we're headed in the right direction. I mean, it definitely feels like we're headed in the right direction. But for now, it's the Phillies and the Astros. With the Phillies just romping, they have not lost a game in the playoffs at home, which has got to really be weighing on the Houston Astros at this point, particularly going into tonight. I mean, this is as close to a must-win game as you can get without it being a must-win game for the Astros.
Has a team ever come back from a 3-1 deficit in the World Series, John?
God, I'll Google that.
Yeah, you better check it out.
When it comes Twitter that.
I know it's happened at least once. People forget, but it has happened.
But
yeah, no, I think after Houston was dismantled, and I think we were both on the same page with it, and most people, I think, were of the mind that Houston was going to come in here and walk all over, because Houston hadn't lost a game in the playoffs at all, right? They had just breezed through everyone, and now all of a sudden, and it is. Now, this goes back to the one thing I had said before this World Series started, what I had said about the Phillies, relative to what the Cubs are trying to do, relative to what the Braves had done, is you look at that Houston lineup, right? They've got a ton of guys who are familiar with this big stage, who are excellent baseball players. I mean, professional, up and down, just great lineup, right? You look at guys like Bregman and Altuve and so forth. But they don't have a bunch of superstars on that team. They have a bunch of really good players. And then you look over the Phillies and you're looking at Harper, and you're looking at, Schwarber has elevated himself to a level of that with some of the exploits he's had, and has, led the league in home runs. You look at a guy like Castellanos, but you look at Real Muto, right? Maybe the best catcher in the game. And it's one of these things where I'm like, okay, the Cubs don't have star power. They need to go out and get that. But it's a matter of getting yourself in position, putting yourself in a position, and then riding those stars. And then, occasionally you'll get a few weird bumps from some of these guys. But that's what I think is so interesting in this, is that you have kind of two separate teams, where I would say the Astros are far more balanced and on paper a much better team, just top to bottom. But you're looking at a Phillies team that is absolutely going out there like they don't know what they don't know, man. They don't know that everybody picked against them, or they don't care. And that's where I would love to see the Cubs get back to it. I think there was a measure of that with that 16 team. The Cubs had some guys who were becoming superstars. They were still pretty young, but they just didn't care, right? They were like, oh, we didn't know we were supposed to be the Cubs and lose.
Yeah.
Right. Like, we're just going to go through it. So I do like that for the Phillies. I dislike the Astros, but it's been interesting to watch how emotionally the Phillies just seem like this team that's ready to go out there and like, we're just going to go beat you. We don't care if you're supposed to be better. And there's the swagger and everything they bring to it. It's been kind of fun to watch.
Well, and you've got two guys that are major, parts of the team. You mentioned Schwarber as being one of them, along with Bryce Harper, who have both been to and won the World Series. And so that goes a long way,
Harper has
too.
not. No, Harper
didn't he
never
win with
won.
the Washington?
No, he was traded.
Oh, that's right.
He signed elsewhere. He didn't get traded. He signed elsewhere. They didn't win. Yeah, he signed. I'm sorry. He didn't get. Yeah, he
was that the season?
Signed with Philly, and then the following season, that's when the Nats won.
That's right. Okay. Oh, so he hasn't won. Okay, but he's been in the playoffs.
But he's been
deep.
He's been in the national spotlight since he was 13 years old. Right. He was this wonderkind who was hitting like 12 home runs in 3 games in Little League or whatever. And then, was on the cover of Sports Illustrated when he was like 15 years old or something like that. So but these guys are used to it, right? But again, Castellanos. You talk about a dude who, whether he was even when he was in Cincinnati playing in relative obscurity, like,
can you imagine?
That dude's got the kind of swagger that you can't just put. But look at what they've done. I mean, here's the thing: Philly has gone out and spent a ton of money. They had the huge contract for Harper. They have a big contract for Real Muto. They signed Zach Wheeler to that big deal. They went out and signed Schwarber. They went out and got Castellanos. Like, when Tom Ricketts says you can't buy a championship, I would ask you to go ahead and look at Philly and look at when John Middleton said, we're going to go spend stupid money and go after this and build. And again, they've done it in a really good way. It seems like that team has vibed pretty well. And they've gotten some good contributions from some young guys who come up. They've made some trades, right? Their center fielder is a guy they picked up in a trade who nobody really thought was going to do anything. He popped a homer last night and has been hitting well. And so it's a mix of all these things. Aaron Nola is a guy who came up through there, but they've absolutely gone out and spent some big money on free agents. And it took them a while. It didn't happen immediately, but now look at them, and that's, to me, that's a sign of like, okay, Cubs, that's okay. And I look at Harper, that's smart money. You talk about spending intelligently. You know what's intelligent? Spending a crap ton of money and then going and winning. So, again, winning wipes a lot of that out. But I think there's interesting construction between these two. But you can absolutely do, as I said before, winning is makes you look smart, and spending money makes it easier to win. So that's spending intelligently.
Interesting how that works, isn't it?
Kind of funny.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens with the World Series, but definitely some interesting stuff going on there. Wouldn't it be just I mean, if this happened, what I'm thinking of here is, Jorge Soler won the MVP, former Cub, won the MVP last year. Quite possible if Schwarber, does well again tonight, that he could win the MVP for the Philadelphia Phillies if they win. Wouldn't it be ironic if we had two Cubs win the World Series MVP back-to-back years when the Cubs are just awful?
And both of whom were big, giant, power-hitting outfielders who the Cubs didn't have room for anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was
at least they traded
at
Soler.
Least, yeah,
they
at least they got something, right?
Yeah,
they got Davis back, and then if we really want to bring it full circle, then we look at, remember Davis coming on and having to be part of that Cubs team that grinded it out in that divisional series against Bryce Harper's Nationals in 2017. When Max Scherzer came on in relief and the Cubs tagged him for a few runs, and that was a whole weird Steven Strasburg and the mold incident, and Dusty Baker, who was managing them at the time and is now with Houston. So Pepe Sylvia, it's like the scene in Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Again, even further circle of Charlie just doing all the string maps and tying everything together with the weird mailroom conspiracy. You can go all over the place, but it would be odd to have the only two players. Well, and then I guess Ben Zobrist had his ring from the previous year, but I was going to say at least the homegrown Cubs, who then went on to other things to have gotten multiples. But yeah, it's just kind of, I don't know if it sucks or if it's kind of neat to watch those guys go on and succeed. I'll go with more of the latter. It's I don't like it.
Yeah, it's both. A little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. I mean, more of column B, I suppose. It's always happy for guys. Like I'm more happy for Castellanos than I am for Schwarber. Just because he seemed like a great guy, and he bonded so well with the fans. And as you mentioned, I mean, God, I can't imagine what it would have been like playing for the Cincinnati Reds. And the fact that he got out of there and is actually playing in a World Series must seem like a dream.
Oh yeah, I mean, because look at him. He's like, man, I really wanted to be in Chicago. Shit, look what happened there. Okay, glad I'm not there anymore. Didn't really want to be in Cincinnati necessarily, but they gave me a great deal. And now you're going from like, holy crap, there's a chemical spill, there's a dumpster fire, and here I am chilling in the penthouse corner suite in the World Series about to win it here. Like, you couldn't look at those two situations that you could have been mired in, and then look at where you are. Although I also look at it and say, gosh, Cubs, had you ponied up the money for Bryce Harper and, made a couple of smarter moves here and there, then, again, this same thing could have happened. And I love this for Harper, because there were so many people who, again, when he was like, oh, he was look at what happened in Washington once he left. It's like, well, yeah, but when you have like Scherzer and Strasburg both pitching to the height of their powers, and you had Juan Soto really do like they had a few other players there. It wasn't like it was just Bryce Harper, so you can't say he left and then they won and that's why. Yeah. But it was I appreciate for him how I don't think he has intentionally gone about anything to quote unquote rehab his image, but there were a lot of people like for a long time. People looked at him as just like a cocky showboat, kind of a like in a bad way, right? But I think the general view of him and about baseball players, about celebration and having fun with the game and enjoying the game has shifted over the last several years because that was part of it. Like Cubs, there were a lot of Cubs fans. A lot of Cubs fans didn't want Shohei Ohtani either. Who like, I don't want that Harper guy around here. Oh, he's a clubhouse cancer. Yeah. He's a sideshow. Like, okay, buddy, like he's a generational type talent, and how many dudes who were crushing it in Little League at 13 end up doing the same thing in Major League Baseball, right? Like that usually doesn't happen. So anyway, I appreciate that for him because I do think he's a good dude and I think he's great for the game and he's one of the game's best players and he's been kind of not recognized for that for so long. And he was hurt for a bunch of this year too. So he's flown under the radar in a big way. But with all due respect to Schwarber, I will be shocked if anybody other than Harper on the Phillies gets the MVP with the way he's hitting.
Well, he was the NLCS MVP though, right?
Yes, but he's still he's batting like 384 in the playoffs with 6 homers.
Yeah,
it's and like what do you have like 13 extra base hits or something? I mean, it's just like it's just not even and to lead off not lead off, but to start the scoring at least like that, and then to get in Alec Boehm's ear and be like whatever, then Boehm just goes first pitch, boom, and then everybody's talking about McCullers tipping his pitches, and I don't know, that was kind of interesting, but it is here's I want to say something about that too because I've seen some of these videos and somebody's showing it like, oh, well, here's a shorter step and here's a fastball and here's a higher leg kick and this was a slider. Okay, you're showing 2 still images. Okay, that doesn't work because not every pitcher has the exact same delivery. Some of them go with more of a slide step if somebody's on base, a lower leg kick if they want to kind of throw off timing. That in and of itself is not indicative. Now, if you want to look at tipping pitches, go look at Randy Johnson. And they were showing this on there last night. Like Randy Johnson throughout his whole career tipped his pitches. When he had his fastball, his glove was held tighter. Like it was, and then when he threw a slider, it was more flared out. And so the ESPN guy whose name is now escaping me, Eduardo, who is it? But he was talking about, he told Randy Johnson that like afterwards, like after his playing days were done, he was like, hey, Randy, come here. You got your glove, right? Hey, show me your fastball. Hold it up like this. He's like, now show me your slider. And the glove's out like this. And Johnson was like, what? Like he didn't even know it.
But he was so good, he could have tipped his pitches. It wouldn't have mattered.
Right. It didn't, like when you throw 99 and then you had that big slider.
He could tell you, hey, I'm getting ready to throw a slider.
Yeah. Like, and you still got to hit it, But anyway, I don't know how much of that was truly McCullers tipping. Because if that's the case, right, like it's, but we've seen it before. I mean, we've heard it with Darvish, that happened. Was that in 17? Yeah, because it was right before the Cubs got him, and there was a lot going on there, and a lot of concerns with that. But taking that back, remember Darvish, he varies his timing, right? And he would do the different leg kick and kind of pause a little bit, and do some things there. So, I just think, man, this is a situation where like the atmosphere and the momentum, it's not often in baseball, but I really do think the momentum and the emotions helped Philly, and I think they were just able to steamroll and just they have so much confidence right now as a team.
Well, that's where you're worried if you're the Astros coming into the game tonight, because it's just like I said, this is about as big of a must-win situation, because the last thing you want to be doing is playing the Phillies in an elimination game, a World Series clinching game in Philadelphia where they feel invincible. I mean, if you're the Astros, you've got to come out and pitch very well on the fringes and try to keep them off the board for the first 3 innings at least and get some runs up on the board to be able to gain a little bit of momentum. They really need a shutdown pitching performance.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be super important for them to come out of the gate and score some runs. You know, not only did they give up early runs, they didn't score at all. Right?
Well,
If you get
Tuvi
shut
hasn't been
out,
doing anything either.
yeah. Because what
And
was
that hurts.
the score? I was just looking that one up on
7-0 last night, right?
It was 7-0 last night. They won 5-2. Oh, the first game was that awesome one back and forth. So that was there. But yeah, coming off of that, and then who's starting tonight? Javier for Houston and Aaron Nola, as I said. But that's the other thing. Phillies got there effectively there. I mean, they got a couple of really good pitchers, but Nola, if he's on his game, like that's a tough ask to try to go out there and beat that dude. So at home, ooh, man. I mean, this,
Yeah,
Philly could really put a stranglehold on him. That's I'm interested to see.
It's going to be interesting. That's for sure. And you mentioned Shohei Ohtani, and the possibility of the Cubs trading for Ohtani seems to have been greatly diminished, mainly because now Brennan Davis, who, we've been wondering about for several weeks since he left the Arizona Fall League game early, and now he has lower back tightness. And we mentioned on the last show that we'd be surprised if he played in the AFL at all the remainder of the year, because why would you risk it, right?
Yeah.
And that's exactly what has happened. He's not going to play anymore in the AFL, which is great, I think, because I don't know why he was playing in the I know why he was playing in the AFL, but I just don't necessarily agree with it. I don't think it was necessary. I think he could have just done his off-season work and gotten ready for spring training and been fine. But whatever, he did, and now
didn't we speculate it was probably a back issue too, or like some kind of a?
Well, I mean,
not
that's what you're
not
thinking,
not
right?
tied. Yeah, not tied to the same thing, but that's part of that.
It's hard to say
your
it's
body's
not
going to
tied
react.
to the same thing. I mean, he had surgery, and so it's like, a pretty big coincidence that suddenly something is wrong with your back and you're feeling what they're calling tightness. So that could be any a description of,
but
really,
if it's structural,
like
the surgery wasn't anything structural, it was just to relieve some nerve pressure. So if this is more of a musculoskeletal thing, I can see how it's different. But then part of that comes from like, okay, yeah, I mean, but if you're and if you're kind of not sitting around, not that he was doing nothing, but if you have a period of inactivity and then you get back to much more strenuous activity, and who knows, he might have been just kicking his ass too much. Maybe he deadlifted too heavy and tweaked something, right? I'm just throwing this out there, things that can happen, right? And then you're like, all right, dude, we're shutting you down. Like we don't, I don't even care if it's nothing. We're not going to make it something by pushing it further. But he's out there. I'm sure he's working out. He wants to get back. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe he pushed it a little too hard, and just ended up, just because he wasn't fully ramped all the way back to 100%, and maybe tried to be there a little earlier than he should have. I don't know.
Yep. And then Alexander Canario, who, normally when you break your ankle, it's because you first roll your ankle and it causes your ankle to snap. What happened in this case, at least when I look at the film and what I see, is he stepped solidly on the bag and then his ankle just snapped, which caused his ankle to roll.
But it rolled.
You don't see that very often.
It rolled out. Normally, when you roll your ankle, and this is left ankle, normally when you roll either of them, they come in and your ankle bulges out this way. His foot went out. So it, like his left cleat, the cleats themselves, right? He's running toward first base, faced back out into the field. Not in, like, because normally that's what happens, right? Because your ankle doesn't usually rotate inward, right? Normally what happens is you step on that outside and you roll it in. But because it
just snapped.
I had to look at it, and it broke it based on what was a bimolarial or whatever. So it broke in two places, and the fix for that is a plate and multiple screws. So probably like 4 or 5 screws on the one side, and then 2 that go in it. So it's like the tibia and the fibula. So it's both sides of where they come down and meet over that, the ankle, and the ends snapped off on both. So they'll have to drive screws up through the one side to secure it, and then plates and screws on the other side. And now, granted, and that kind of injury is typically seen in people in their 60s and older, largely in women, because it's generally something that ends up happening due to osteoporosis and then falls, right? Because it's not a normal sports injury, right? I mean, it's hard to say what normal is, but that's generally where it's seen, is in those folks, because the bones are more brittle and they're more prone to breaking. I don't think there's too many 60-year-old women, 70-year-old women who are running down the bag like that, and then maybe in a softball game. But the troublesome part is when you look at the recovery period. They're saying like minimum 12 weeks. Sometimes they could say 6 months for full weight bearing, and even then, like the mobility of the joint is reduced. I think that's difficult though, because in most cases, again, if you're talking about sample size of people who are 60s, 70s, 80s, well, they're probably not going to recover quite as quickly as a 23-year-old elite athlete. So I would suspect that his timeline is a little bit better for that. But if you're looking at 3 months minimum before even being able to bear weight on the thing, and here's the other part that really sucks. He also dislocated his left shoulder. Now, he's right-handed, so it's not his throwing arm, and he does have a cannon for an arm, so that part's good, but he's a right-handed swinger. And so that left arm is where your extension comes in. So that can be really tough, but it also means left broken ankle, left dislocated shoulder. He can't do any cardio lower body stuff. He can't do any lifting, right? Unless he's going to do all unilateral, which would be super weird, and just like, have one big arm. He really can't do anything for a long time. And that goes way beyond what a normal shutdown would be.
Right? I mean, like, when you say he can't do anything, he's like limited to sitting on the couch.
Right. Or maybe, putting his foot up in the little scooter thing. But even then he can't do it, because if you got a dislocated shoulder, you can't run the risk of pushing yourself around and supporting.
Like, I had one
you can barely even crutch around. Yeah. I mean, if you got a dislocated shoulder, you don't want to stick a pair of crutches up under your armpit and try to walk around with that. So
this goes to his overall fitness. It's not just his baseball fitness. His overall fitness is going to, take a hit.
It is the only thing, and it's not a good thing by any stretch, but at least it happened late in October to where he's got almost the entire off season to recuperate. So again, if you're looking at November, December, January, like, he certainly will not be able to participate in spring training, at least not to any great extent. Maybe he can start with some very light baseball activities. You know what I mean? But I mean, we're talking, if you're looking at 12 weeks, that's almost 3 months. So he may only just be getting back to weight bearing on that ankle by about the time people start reporting to camp. They're in February.
Really impact the depth of the Cubs organization in the outfield, where it was, before these two injuries, you're saying they're flush in the outfield, and, you look at their prospects, and it's not like they don't have a lot of good prospects still, but when you're getting 22, 23-year-old guys who are basically close to MLB ready, those are guys who you could trade and, get a lot of value out of. And I think that was kind of the thought process going into the off season, where we were talking about, hey, maybe the Cubs make, swing a big trade or two. And maybe this Ohtani, there's a possibility of trading for him, because they have so many prospects they could, and Canario's name was mentioned most of the time in those trade conversations. And now, obviously, he's not going to be traded. And it's not like Davis was going to be traded, but there was that depth where you could go and say, hey, we could trade a younger prospect now because we've got, X, Y, and Z kind of set up, and just really complicates the situation more for the Cubs. I'd be surprised if they make a big trade now, where just a week ago we were saying we'd be surprised if they didn't.
Yeah. And I remember when we were talking about it last week and just about, hey, what are they doing with Brennan Davis? And I had said, I don't think this is their primary motivation for it, but Jed Hoyer doesn't want to lose leverage if he can avoid it. Well, then you have less than a week later, the Canario injury and the announcement about Davis, which really at that point, by the time we heard about Davis, and I'm not saying that necessarily it was based on the Canario news. However, if we're sitting there saying, well, we haven't really heard about Davis, maybe there's some leverage involved there because they would like to make another move. Well, as soon as the Canario thing happened, you're like, okay, well, that's out the window for sure. We know nothing's coming up with that. So any leverage that might have been there, even nominally, with kind of being veiled about Davis, that goes out the window with Canario hurt like he is. So it's like, okay, fine, yeah, his back's jacked up, we're pulling him out. But it does. That's what was difficult is Canario is already on the 40-man roster. Yep. Davis is almost certain to be added to it, but and then at least you can add him and throw Canario onto the 60-day and clear up another spot. But the issue there was like, okay, he was going to either have to be he was going to have to be traded, or they were going to give him every opportunity to win a spot and try to break camp with the team and maybe get out there because he can pick it out in center. But that's gone now. Like you said, they have depth, but it went from having two guys who could very possibly have an impact in Chicago or at least fill a role from time to time to now certainly one of them won't, at least not for the foreseeable future. And Davis, again, it's a little murky there. That's a little bit troublesome. I mean, I know that there still are some guys out there. I wonder what this does. Again, not that either of those things individually would spur them to sign Ian Happ to an extension, but now we got Ian Happ with the Gold Glove. He didn't get traded. He was more consistent. I wonder whether and to what extent, and I'm actually writing about this topic right now, that this would maybe get the Cubs a little bit more motivated to ensure, if nothing else, the certainty of having someone like that locked in. I don't think they'll stretch for it. I don't think they'll do anything wild, but Happ has indicated that he certainly wants to stay. Mm-hmm. I just wonder if I wonder if there's a middle ground that exists that they have not really found with any of the other guys. That's the whole reason everybody else left, is because the Cubs weren't really willing to move off of an initial an offer that didn't really meet where any of those players were wanting to be in terms of what they wanted to make. I wonder if that exists with Happ or not. And I don't think I'd be surprised either way. As weird as that sounds, like I would not be surprised either way if they get a deal worked out in spring training or if they don't and he ends up being traded. But I will say this. I think I would be less surprised. Well, no, I wouldn't be less surprised by a deadline deal. I wouldn't be surprised if Happ is traded in the offseason if they don't work something out with him. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, if they're, I guess they'd just be trading for more prospects at that point, right?
Yeah, which really, I don't.
I mean, with Davis and Canario in the picture, I think that would have been much more likely. But it's just like now, if you're planning to make a serious run next season, who do you plug in the outfield? I mean, you have to go sign somebody at this point.
And I figured they would anyway, but then they'd have to get somebody but that was really my thought was, hey, they'll go sign a center fielder, kind of a glove first guy to hold down a spot for a year, maybe with an option on there. But yeah, it's kind of a tough, but let me run these numbers by you before I share them, right? Because Happ's he's in line to make estimated to make somewhere between it's like 10.6, so we'll say $10 to $11 million in his final year of arbitration, right? Now, do you think a deal of something like 5 years, $75 million, which would include let's say an $11 million ARB salary for 23, so that's $64 million in quote unquote new money over 4 years. So he'd have his 1 year at 11, and then 4 additional years. So that's $16 million AAV. I think that is something the Cubs would be very comfortable with. That would take him, that'd be his age through his age 32 season. This will be his age 28. So, again, ostensibly should be still in his athletic prime, or, just sunsetting it at the end of that. Locks him in for an additional 4 years. He would still be at an age where if he's performing well, he could still hit the market and be in line for another decent deal. Maybe not huge, but still decent, age 32. Do you think that is something he would be willing to do, or does that feel to you like more of the Cubs kind of opening salvo in maybe negotiations?
Yeah, I'd be surprised that he would take that without hitting the market first.
Yeah,
and I say that because he was an all-star this year. He won a Gold Glove. Arguably his best year as a pro. for sure. You know, he's a switch hitter. You know, I mean, it's if I were him, I would test the market. You know, but who knows, right? I mean, he's obviously, you know, he's blended in really well with the Cubs community. I mean, like he's you know, the fans love him. He socializes really well with everybody, and so, you know, you think to yourself, is there that connection there that he really values? But yeah, I mean, 16 million a year for sure. I mean, from a Cubs perspective, I'd say they'd probably do that all day long.
Do you think he would take this? How about if we do this? So same duration, so 5 years, 87 million total, which effectively, again, now we're looking at like 76 million in new money, right? So that's 19 million a year now. So he's got his 11, we'll say 11 on the ARB years, 19 million AAV, at least a partial no trade. I don't know if we'll go full no trade, but a partial no trade. He can supply the list of teams that he would accept a trade to. And then there's some performance incentives. So now we've gone to guaranteeing $87 million for 5 years, no trade, at least partial, and incentives. Is that something he goes for?
I think that's much more realistic. I think what you do if you're the Cubs is you might start with that first offer and then go to what you just said. And I think if you did that, you might be able to
think there's probably room in between those two that he might be willing. You know, again, he seems like a pretty savvy guy.
Lower dollars with a full no trade.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And they've been really reluctant to do that in the past. But I think knowing how he kind of reacted and knowing that they were shopping him and that was a difficult time for him and he was hearing the rumors and all that stuff, I think there'd be a lot of value in that to him of knowing he could stay there. And that's that they've indicated, again, they haven't said as much to say like, we're looking at 5-year deals, right? And they'll have to go longer than that if they do really want to go after one of the top shortstops. But I think that 5 and under, like 5 seems to me outside of the one huge deal, if they do it, right? If they were to go get Correa or Trey Turner or something like that, I think they'd be willing to stretch. Outside of that, I think 4 to 5 is really the limit of the duration to which Carter Hawkins and Jed Hoyer are trying to look. And I also think they would actually be, I fully believe actually, that they would be willing to go higher. There's some interesting stuff, you know, part of this I'm writing about when I'm looking at Kodai Senga and Carlos Rodon is looking at them. And I wonder with guys like that, if they're seeking 5 years, we saw it with Stroman, right? That everybody figured he'd be kind of in that 5-year range, that they were able to buy up the AAV, right? Buy off a year or two with higher average values. And I wonder if they go out there trying to do that in the market and continue to try to do that. If you want 5, hey, we'll go 4. If you want 4, we'll go 3, but we'll inflate those dollars a little bit, get you out of this thing earlier, maybe even put an opt-out in there. And that's you know, I wonder if that'll work with Hap. But I think this might be one, all things considered, that they look at doing, because if they do lock him up, that gives him a little bit more freedom again with some of those young guys. If you figure Hap's out the door in a year, now all of a sudden the urgency changes a little bit to make sure you get somebody in place in that other corner spot out of that group of prospects. If you got Hap there, it gives you a lot more flexibility.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing, you know, is that we talk about all the prospects that the Cubs have, and, you know, there's a lot of hope that's embedded in that. But at the end of the day, this just goes to show, man, until they get to the show and they actually perform, they're just prospects. They are not major league players. And so that's the thing is, man, you can have as many prospects as you want. It doesn't mean anything. And so that's where I like Hap. He is a guy who's been there. He's proven himself. You know, he's part of the culture. He fits really well. Obviously, you know, he's got the lefty bat, which is important. And I just think that, you know, and obviously the switch hitter, but yeah, I mean, if I'm the Cubs, I sure hope they're trying to extend him right now, because I know that they wanted to trade him, but I think looking back, maybe that was a blessing that didn't happen, because it really gives them the ability to do what really they probably need to do, which is at least lock down. You know, you've got Suzuki out there. I mean, he's obviously not going anywhere. He's got 4 more years left on his deal, But it would be nice to know you've got somebody there. And yeah, then if you've got prospects that come up and rake and Hap becomes expendable, then perhaps you could trade him. Obviously if he has a no trade clause, that kind of, I mean, he'd have to sign off on any trade, but
and I assume he'll want one. I have to think because that's the thing. You're saying, I want to be in Chicago. I want to be a Cub. I want to be in this organization, in this environment, in this atmosphere, whatever. I don't think he would do an extension that doesn't include a no trade, because he knows now what that feels like to be a part of those trade rumors, to be shopped, to possibly be on the way out. And he doesn't want to go through that again. That was the case with Chris Bryant. That was the case with Rizzo. That was the case with like all of them. Because Hap also saw what it was like for those guys. Then he experienced it himself. And I think that's kind of one of those where, like, yeah, I want to stay, but I want to stay. Right? Like, not just like, yes, I want to sign a new deal, but like, if I sign a new deal, it is to stay here with the Chicago Cubs for the next 4 or 5 years, not to just have a new deal and then you can move me at your whims. But at the same time, the other thing that comes back to is you as you mentioned, Suzuki's out there and right. Again, nobody is guaranteed, but Pete Crow Armstrong certainly looks like the goods, and he's a guy who could. Here's the thing with Crow Armstrong, though, is even if the bat doesn't continue to do what it does, like, defense is not one of those things that is just like fleeting and, oh gosh, I don't know. Will he be able to play defense at the major league level? Like, yeah, the ball isn't different. You know what I mean? Like, that'll carry even if he doesn't hit like he has been. And I think his athleticism will allow him to hit very well. But you look at that, and now you're going, okay, we don't have a spot left for any of these guys coming up, whether you're looking at Kevin Alcantara or if Davis gets things right, if Canario gets things right. And Canario's a bigger hit or miss prospect to me. Owen Casey, there's a bunch of these dudes in there. And you're saying, they're not all going to make it. They're not all going to be in the organization in 4 years. But we don't have enough room if we sign this dude. And that's where I wonder how much the Cubs are waiting on to see. I think anything, if it were to get done with Hap, is one of those that might wait till right up toward, kind of like what Hendricks did when it was like he signed it right after spring training closed, right before the regular season started on his extension, that they want to wait and see everything, who comes around, who's healthy, because I think the worst thing for Ian Happ's future in Chicago would be for Brennan Davis to come into camp healthy and have a really good spring training, because then they're looking at it and go like, we could extend you, or we've got this guy coming up as a rookie who we just have to pay $700,000. Sorry, Ian, good luck. Hopefully you get to play in Cincinnati where you hit the ton, but I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. And then there's talk around Senga, Kodai Senga, who is Japan, played in the NPB for several years, and now he's coming stateside. How exactly does that process work in terms of him coming? Does he just come in as a straight up free agent?
Yep. He's
so basically like
he
Suzuki.
Never got posted. Yeah, he opted out of his deal, so he's been around long enough. Normally it's like 9 years or whatever it is. They got to be there, but he's aged out of that, and he had asked to be posted multiple times, but his organization never did, and now he had signed a deal and he was able to opt out of it, so he is just an unrestricted international free agent.
So he's almost 30 years old. He'll be 30 in January, and so not a young guy, but I mean, he's had a lot of success. He's a right-handed pitcher. He's had a lot of success in the NPB and internationally. And there's a lot of talk around the Cubs adding him as kind of like, the top guy they add. Although I still hope they add Verlander. And maybe Verlander's bad game in game one hurts his value. I have no idea, but I think talk about Senga and why you think he fits well with the Cubs versus somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things there, and I think it'll be interesting. The two most recent reports about him, and what's kind of wild is, like, over an 11-year career, he's averaged, I think, 3.1 walks per 9 innings, which is solid. I mean, it's not elite, but that's very good. It's perfectly respectable. But the understanding is maybe he's got a few issues with his fastball command, not so much control, but more the command. Doesn't get a ton of cold strikes on the fastball. Although his fastball touches 100. He's got a splitter that is apparently just unreal. A true out pitch, if you will. Right, that'll be helpful. I think where you look at it, and there's a couple things here. There have been some estimates about 5 years, $75 million is what it might take. I know Keith Law had mentioned 4 years, $80 million was maybe something. Which again, we go back to it. I know that'll sound weird to people at the outset for me to say 4 years, $80 million is probably more amenable to the Cubs and presents less risk than 5 years at $75 million. You say, well, what do you mean? That doesn't make any sense. It's $5 million more dollars, and it's a lot more. It's another 5 million AAV or whatever. But they're buying out that fifth year, right? That's that much less risk on a pitcher who will. So if he doesn't pan out as well, you're not on the hook for that fifth year, and really a few $1 million here or there, given where they are at in the relative to the luxury tax and what'll be falling off in the future, and kind of where I feel like they want to work, makes a lot of sense. But where I really feel like, and as I keep thinking about that, the more I mull this over, the more sense it makes. Because if you look at the rotation they've constructed or they have so far, can't really depend on Kyle Hendricks anymore. Maybe you can, but maybe he'll come back okay. But you can't depend on him for 200 innings, right? Marcus Stroman, he didn't qualify. He only threw 138 innings, and that led the staff. Justin Steele threw 119 innings, and that was easily a career high. Keegan Thompson was at 115. Smiley cannot be counted on to throw a bunch if they bring him back. Hayden Wisniewski, are you going to bump him up and all of a sudden have him go? Like, there's nobody in that rotation who you're sitting there going, this is a workhorse. You've got to figure out a way to eat up those innings, and it's not going to be from somebody who's going 7-8 innings every time they're out there and making 35 starts. I really think, and particularly if you go after a Carlos Rodon or if you go after Justin Verlander, right? Verlander would end up being the workhorse at like 40 years old. And that's kind of a weird deal. So I really think the Cubs are looking at building a pitching staff that has a lot of rotation depth that can be deployed, whether that's in a 6-man rotation or a modified 5-man where you kind of see that fifth spot being rotated a little bit to kind of skip a turn in the rotation or back up a turn in the rotation to spread that. I think you see guys like Wisniewski, Killian, maybe Hers, maybe Wicks working in almost a piggyback role. Or maybe you have maybe you have Keegan Thompson working in a piggyback type role. I don't know what that is, but that would kind of protect, because Senga is coming over. He's the Japanese rotations are usually 6 men. They pitch once a week. They go through. They have the day off. It's kind of like how the minor leagues go here, right? And you set back up. So he's not. We see that a lot with Japanese pitchers early on. They've got to kind of get used to it, kind of stretch out for a certain duration. So there are concerns about his ability to go deep through and face an order 3 times. So, does he have a little bit of a shorter? So as they're bringing him along, I just think it makes all the sense in the world, whether he is your premier signing, quote unquote, because that's a longer term or maybe a higher overall term. If you paired him up with a Justin Verlander, right, you get Verlander for 1 or 2 years. Again, now we've mitigated a lot of that risk. Right, I say we. I'm not the one making the decision. They have mitigated that risk through sheer depth, right? You can, and you've also set it up so you can kind of mix and match a little bit better. I like it a lot. I think Senga, for the value that he would bring and the ability that he's got, I think he'll adapt well to American baseball. I think he threw like 3 shutout innings against the U.S. team in the Olympics a couple years ago. So he's faced some of these guys before, and the pure stuff is there. I'm very interested to see how a guy like that would be able to work with Tommy Hotovy in the Cubs pitch lab, but I think they could kind of help him out on a few things, maybe with that sequencing. So yeah, I like it. I know a lot of people are really, really bullish on him, just period. I like him more as if they sign another big time pitcher, because I think the Cubs need that. They're going to be losing Hendricks anyway, and there's nobody right now. There is nobody, and even if we're talking Senga, even if we're talking Rodon, and any of those, it's really tough to look at any individual pitcher on that team and say, I trust this dude to make 35 starts and throw 200 innings. I don't actually trust that about any of them, right? Right.
And I think because we saw Stroman was injured, and
yep.
And obviously Hendricks has been out for a long period of time, and no one was healthy all year.
No, and they're
Adrian
Sampson. Getting younger. Yeah, none of them are getting younger. A lot of them haven't been healthy. I mean, Steele has dealt with injury issues his entire career. He's never really had. And if you look at it, and this is something I put in the piece about Senga too, this isn't just a Cubs thing, right? So I don't want people to look at what I'm saying and say, hey, this is just the Cubs are only doing this. But if you just look at the number of qualified pitchers in the major leagues on a year-over-year basis, and then where, the threshold typically falls in the 160 to 164 inning range to be qualified for official statistical consideration, right? But there were only, and I forget what the number is now, like 42 players this year, pitchers, and like 39, 38 last year. And then, but if you go back pre-2020, right, we can't really count that one. It was like 64, 65. And if you went back further, the number would continue to grow. But there are fewer and fewer pitchers throwing high numbers of innings. It's just the game is evolving to a certain extent, and I think it would be smart for the Cubs to kind of go in sort of where the Rays are at. You get some guys who don't have egos, right, who are willing to go out there and kind of do a little bit of anything, and you can balance that out, and hopefully, again, maybe not eliminate, but maybe the injury prevention is huge. The greatest ability that you have is availability. And so it doesn't do any good. And that's why people say, like, well, why would you want DeGrom? Give me DeGrom at $50 million. give him $100 million for 2 years. He's not going to sign that. But I mean, I'd take it, because then if you back that up with additional depth, even if he can't make every start, right? But I think there are a lot of these guys who might have to have that. Kyle Hendricks might have to skip starts every now and again to continue to pitch through the season. I don't know that, but he might, right? And so you can throw a bullpen game every once in a while. Get some of those guys who've been piggybacking. Cool, here we go. You guys are each throwing 3 innings today. We're going to extend that spot one time. Give this guy an extra day of rest. I don't know. But yeah, I think that's where they're going to go with pitching, to be honest. I really think they're going to add some more rotation depth. Two starters, I think they go after.
Let's hope so. Well, we're going to find out soon, because when maybe not soon, but free agency starts. The latest free agency will be next Friday, November 11th, because Game 7 is scheduled for Sunday, November 6th. So it's 5 days after the last game of the World Series. So that'd be Friday, and it could, you would think it possibly start earlier than that. So, but yeah. It's going to get really interesting here really quickly.
Yep.
And things will start breaking as soon as the World Series ends. So looking forward to that. We'll plan on circling back, I guess maybe next Wednesday, just seeing how things are going, and depending on the timing of the World Series, and maybe if the World Series ends around, could it end Wednesday? Let's see. There's a game on Saturday and Sunday. So, I mean, depending on what happens today, if the Phillies win, I mean, they're going to be on the verge of clinching this baby, and that could happen on the 3rd. And if that happens, then you're looking at the 8th.
Yeah.
Which would be Tuesday. So yeah, Wednesday would be perfect. So we'll try to sync it up with the next show with the kickoff of free agency.
Woo, which the last few years, last year was different, and I had my theories about that at the time.
Cubs were very active last year. Yeah, they didn't have a full team going into the season, and the CBA and everything like that. But they signed a lot of guys, and some quality guys.
Yeah, and I mean, they made some big moves, and I think we'll see them be aggressive, with not spending wildly and going out. I don't think they're making their big free agent shortstop signing right out of the gate. But I do think they're going to want to solidify things on that pitching front. I think what they're going to want to do is, I know they've got some major targets, but I really truly believe they're going to try to lock a few things up so they know where else they need to operate from that point, and what kind of money they've got. I don't believe this will be a situation where they're sitting back in the wings, waiting for people's value to fall. I do think they're going to go out there and try to act aggressively with a couple of these pitchers and try to get them snapped up on some of these deals that are short in duration, but really heavy on the AAV side to try to lock that up. So,
yeah, it's going to be real interesting because if you remember last year with the CBA shutdown looming, there were a lot of big signings that kicked off, and I think the Cubs signed Stroman in that.
They got him like right at the last second. Yeah.
And so it's going to be weird to see how it develops this year, to see if that kind of happens at the beginning of this free agency period as well. If there's a number of big guys signed right out of the box, or if it's one of those things that waits a while. I think you're going to see a number of big guys signed within the first 3 to 4 weeks. But we'll see. There's just, especially from the shortstop side of things. But the tricky thing is that stupid qualifying offer.
Yeah.
That's attached to a lot of these guys. And I just wish that would have gone away. It would have just made it so much better, so much cleaner. But I guess the Cubs are glad it didn't go away because Wilson Contreras is going to have a QO attached to him. So who knows? We'll see. Wow. So anyways, we will, thanks for joining us, everybody. And we will circle back with you next week. Until then, have a great rest of your week and a great weekend.
Cool. See ya.
Have fun.